So good morning and afternoon, I guess, everyone. Thanks for coming to the webinar. It's great to see so many people here. I'm Amanda Beekle. If you don't know me, I work for Birds Canada, which is a national charitable organization dedicated to bird conservation. And we work to be Canada's voice for birds, along with thousands of donors, staff, and more than 74,000 volunteers now. Before we jump in, I'll do a land acknowledgement. And since we've got people from all over the country today, please feel free to share an acknowledgement from where you're joining in the chat. So I gratefully live, play, and work in Mohkinstsis or Calgary and honor the nation's part of Treaty 7 territory. Those are the Blackfoot Confederacy, consisting of Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai nations, the Tsuut'ina, the Îethka Stoney Nakoda Nation, which includes Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney, and the Métis Nations of Alberta, District 5 and 6. And also, Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work in the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems. And we support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples to care for the land. So next slide, please. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. You'll be on mute automatically the entire meeting, but then at the end of the meeting, if you'd like to ask a question out loud, just raise your hand so that we can turn your microphone on. And similarly, we've disabled the video for the presentation as well. We ask that you type all of your questions into the Q&A, which is where we'll be keeping an eye on to answer questions throughout the presentation and at the end. But feel free to chat with other participants in the chat box. There's also closed caption options if you want to see closed captions in English or French or other languages. So to do this, you click the small arrow next to the closed caption box at the bottom. And from that, you can turn on translation and change the language to whatever you'd like. This is the first time we've used this, so if you have any feedback, it would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, we'll be recording the webinar and sharing it afterwards, and also putting it up on the KBA website. So you'll have access to it. Thank you, Molly. So today's meeting, we're going to try and stick to an hour-long presentation to leave 30 minutes for questions. First, we'll have a quick intro from presenters, since we're kind of doing one big presentation together. Then we'll refresh everyone on what KBAs are, talk a bit about the IBA to KBA transition. Then we'll give some provincial updates with some really interesting case studies and follow it up with a bit of what is to come with the Caretaker program. And then we'll finish with questions. So I've already introduced myself, so I will pass it on to Chelsea, Molly, then Peter to introduce themselves, and we will get started.
Fun. So I work with Amanda at Birds Canada on the key biodiversity area team. I'm a KBA technician, and I'm focused on identifying sites for birds in Quebec, the Atlantic, and the territories. And I'll pass it off to Molly.
Hi, everyone. I'm sure there's lots of familiar names in the chat, but for those of you I haven't met, my name is Molly Bradford. I'm also coming to you from Birds Canada's Key Biodiversity Areas team. Just like Chelsea, I'm a KBA technician, so identifying sites for birds in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. And I will pass it off to Peter.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see everyone or be in the virtual spaces, everyone, today. My name is Peter Chaurier. I'm joining from traditional and ceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in Ottawa, Ontario. I work with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, which is another nonprofit environmental organization, and one of the partners on the KBA Canada project, helping to identify species KBAs and ecosystem KBAs. I'm our assessment and outreach coordinator, so helping to assess sites and also coordinate some of the outreach and engagement around them.
Awesome. My name is Liam Reagan. I'm coming to you from BC Nature. I am the provincial coordinator for BC, and I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Wasanik and the Kungwa nations. Also, just a quick note, I think some people had issues with the chat in the beginning, but it's working now. So if anyone tried to put an intro in there and didn't, now you can.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with a bit of a background on what key biodiversity areas are, or a refresher for those of you who already might know some about key biodiversity areas. So KBAs are sites that contribute significantly to the persistence of biodiversity. And the idea of creating this KBA tool was to build on tools like important bird areas, important plant areas, and also things like Alliance for Zero Extinction sites and Ramsar wetlands, and to create something that could encompass all of these concepts. So key biodiversity areas can be identified in any type of habitat and for any taxa, such as birds, lichen, plants, insects, or can also be identified for rare and at-risk ecosystems like alpine and grassland ecosystems. Designating sites as KBAs doesn't offer formal protections or directly change land management or access, but the goal is that this information is presented in a public layer and can be used to inform things like conservation planning, restoration work, surveys, and getting funding for conservation efforts on the land. The key biodiversity area work in Canada is being led by teams at Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, which is where Peter is from, Birds Canada, where Molly and Amanda and I are from, and NatureServe Canada. Birds Canada is focused on identifying KBAs for bird species, while WCS Canada focuses on identifying KBAs for all other taxonomic groups, and NatureServe is involved more with the mapping and the data for the project. We also have a KBA steering committee, which is made up of representatives from member organizations and individuals with expertise related to conservation planning. Their role is to oversee the program, provide guidance, and review proposals to give the final acceptance for sites. Some of these include members from COSEWIC, from Nature Canada, World Wildlife Fund Canada, and Nature Conservancy of Canada, just to name a few. The criteria for a site to qualify as a KBA is laid out in the global and the national standard for identification of KBAs. The global standard was created in 2016 by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN. After this global standard was developed, a national standard was created in order to adapt this for the Canadian context. The difference between the national and global standard is majorly that the national standard uses Canadian species populations and threat status rather than global threat status and population size. And also at the national level, we can use classifications below species level, so including things like subspecies and varieties. The global and national standard both have 5 main categories of criteria that a KBA might qualify under, as you can see on the slide here. For sites to qualify, they must meet these quantitative criteria, which, as I mentioned before, can be applied to all taxonomic groups and ecosystems. These 5 categories of criteria are threatened biodiversity, geographically restricted biodiversity, ecological integrity, biological processes, and irreplaceability. I won't go into the details of each criteria, but we'll give a couple quick examples for a few of them. So criterion D and A are used quite often for bird species specifically, so I thought I might focus in on these. These are both threshold-based criteria. So criterion D is applied to aggregations in various life stages. So for example, a breeding colony that supports over 1% of the national northern gannet population would qualify under criterion D as a national KBA. Criterion A, on the other hand, applies to species that are classified as threatened. So the threshold lowers a little bit for these threatened species. For example, red-headed woodpecker is assessed as endangered nationally by COSEWIC, so any site that supports over 0.5% of the national population would qualify under this criterion. Now to move on to a bit of the work of actually identifying sites as KBAs. So for bird species, we decided to start the KBA scoping work by first assessing all of the sites that were originally identified as important bird areas in the 1990s. There are 581 sites recognized as IBAs across Canada, which you can see on the map there. This gave us a good starting place for identifying sites that might qualify as KBAs for bird species. So to start the work for birds, we first assessed whether species at these IBAs would now qualify under any of the KBA criteria, and also assessed whether there were any new species, whether that's birds or non-birds, or ecosystems that would also qualify at these sites. We did this by first taking all data from Nature Counts, which is a database run by Birds Canada and holds all of our program survey data. It holds eBird data and many other sources. So we took all of the data from this and assessed whether any of this data at these sites would qualify for KBA criteria. And we also then updated all of our national and global population estimates in our database to make sure that we were comparing site populations to the most recent and accurate population estimates available.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea. So I'm going to talk about the process of identifying KBAs. So identifying a KBA is a bottom-up, collaborative, and really rigorous process so that we can be confident that the set of sites we produce are all high-quality sites for biodiversity. So the first kind of stage is scoping. And it's the only stage that's a little bit different for the IBA to KBA process, since we already have an existing set of sites that already have boundaries, text, numbers, even though a lot of those were out of date before we started this process. But basically, scoping is looking at all of the biodiversity data that we have from nature counts, NatureServe, conservation data centers around Canada, iNaturalist, and other sources, to see where certain species and ecosystems will qualify to become a KBA or is likely to qualify. After we've gathered data that seems pretty likely to qualify, we start reaching out to Indigenous communities that are overlapping or whose traditional territory is close to the scoped out site. This step continues throughout the rest of the process to make sure that communities can participate however and whenever they would like to in proposing a KBA. Next, we have a technical review, which is chatting with species or place experts, which includes caretakers, and making sure that boundaries are delineated appropriately, that population estimates are accurate, and the text about a site is correct. Then we move on to a general review, which is where we contact other stakeholders like local and provincial governments, other NGOs that do work in the area, and more groups, nature clubs, things like that, to alert them to the KBA and to give them a chance to review the KBA proposal as well. And then lastly, it's submitted to the KBA Canada Steering Committee, reviewed and accepted with comments sometimes. Then we have the site translated and put onto the KBA Canada website. Next slide, please. Thank you. So collaborating with Indigenous communities and people who've been stewards of the land for sometimes thousands of years is the best way to address biodiversity loss and climate change. So it's a really important goal of the program to reach out early in the process to engage with communities. And this gives communities the opportunity to give input on proposals in regards to boundaries, data, text, but also to make sure that KBAs can support communities' goals, conservation or otherwise. Some examples, but definitely not all the ways of how we try to, benefit communities. Here's a few examples. So we include Indigenous place names, other cultural values of sites, and past and ongoing caretaking efforts in the text of the proposals, which ends up on the website. So if communities are comfortable with that, we share that information. We can share biodiversity data when needed and contacts when we're not able to share data directly so that they can have access to biodiversity data. We've also supported some applications to grants to support Indigenous protected and conserved areas, and help support monitoring using KBAs as kind of a tool. The KBA tool can also be used to gain more global and national recognition, to leverage funding, and it can feed into plans for monitoring or other capacity building, and can even be used to get a community more engaged and excited about monitoring a certain species. Next, thank you. So along with Indigenous communities using KBAs as tools, we're also hoping that there's continued uptake by government, business, industry, and other NGOs. This could be through OECM or protected area planning, use in the 30 by 30 and other biodiversity framework strategies. And in fact, KBAs are already mentioned as a way to expand the protected area network in the Environment Canada and Climate Change Strategic Plan. And they're also mentioned in Canada's 2030 Nature Strategy. We hope that more biodiversity first decision making can happen in land use planning and industry, and that KBAs will support this. KBAs will also be used for continued stewardship and conservation through the caretaking program. And we hope to support even more Indigenous-led conservation projects however we can with the KBA tool. We also want to help encourage and guide long-term biodiversity monitoring in and around KBAs. And of course, we want to inspire and educate people about nature and biodiversity in general. Most people, when you get talking about birds and caribou, are interested and they want to learn more. So we'll keep doing that too. I think I'm going to pass it on to Chelsea now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. So now we're going to go into a bit of an update on how the general KBA identification process is going. And I'm going to start with a bit of an update on the IBA to KBA transition specifically. So as you can see, we have some numbers on the slide here. Some things to highlight are that there are now 73 IBAs that have been officially accepted as nationally as KBAs. There are also many more sites that are still in progress. So of the 280 sites that you can see in progress there, 86 of those are in the final stages of review, so are likely to be accepted in the near future. We've also identified 81 IBAs that might qualify as KBAs if further surveys are done. So this kind of gives us a way to prioritize potential work at these sites in the future. And there are another 144 IBAs that do not appear to meet KBA criteria. We're going to go into a bit more of some general provincial and territorial updates, but if you're curious about specific sites, feel free to reach out to us afterwards, since we probably won't have time to go into all the site-specific questions in this webinar.
WCS Canada, Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, like Chelsea mentioned earlier, is helping to, or Amanda mentioned earlier, is helping to identify all the KBAs for other taxonomic groups and biodiversity elements for species and ecosystems. So I'll give a bit of an update on the work that we've been doing there as well. In terms of species KBAs, and this is covering everything that's not birds, from bison to lichen to sturgeon to beetles, and everything in between there. We have also about 550 sites, although some of these definitely overlap. A lot of these overlap with IBAs, and those sites are important for not just birds, but other species as well. So of those 550 sites that WCS Canada is working on, most of them are either accepted or in the kind of review stages, either being technically reviewed by different species experts or biodiversity experts or Indigenous knowledge holders and other expert local knowledge holders, or are kind of published on the KBA Canada website. All of the sites that are in development now, we're aiming by June 2025, so June this year, to have those in the review stage as well. So hoping to soon have kind of a full complement of KBAs, a comprehensive complement of KBAs on the website. The other side of the KBAs that we're working on, the ecosystem and ecological integrity KBAs, is another really interesting side of the work too. The work here is a lot behind the species KBAs. It's a lot more difficult to identify KBAs for ecosystems, it turns out, than to identify them for species, mostly because of a lack of nationally consistent and cohesive ecosystem classification work. So we have within different provinces and territories a lot of really good data on ecosystems and ecosystem mapping, but this is not always, or there's no kind of national framework for putting all this together. So we have a lot of little regional pictures and a lot of good data there, but not data that stretches across all of Canada. So that makes identifying nationally significant and globally significant sites for ecosystems really difficult. We do have a couple sites for ecosystems that have been identified, places for alvars in Ontario and Manitoba, some Great Lakes sand dunes or dunes ecosystems as well in Ontario and around the Great Lakes. And these are really globally rare ecosystems that have been a little easier to work with. But in terms of thinking about types of ecosystems like grasslands or prairies or forests and other types of meadows and savannas and other things, these will be a couple of years, at least a year away, probably 1 or 2 years away from being identified. Ecological integrity work is also very much in development. Don't have a huge amount of time to touch on that now, but can talk about that more in the questions if people are interested, but also a couple years away and a lot of work being done to understand how especially indigenous values of ecosystems and land and waters will play into our understanding of ecosystem health and integrity in terms of that work.
So on your screen now, you can see a map of all the accepted KBAs that are currently published on our website. This is just an overview, but if you're curious in looking into these sites more specifically, you can check out the KBA Canada website for an interactive map. As you can see, many sites have been accepted more in southern Canada. There's also quite a few in Yukon that have been accepted as well. Although if we add the Canada KBAs to this map, you'll see that there's still lots of sites where we have work currently ongoing. And these are sites that we're still working on assessing or nominating. A lot of this work, for example, you can see in Quebec, there's still a lot of sites that are in development. And then also in Northern Canada, we're actively working on Indigenous outreach and site development for a lot of former IBAs as well. To give a bit of a taxonomic breakdown of the accepted and candidate KBAs, there are currently 744 taxa that meet KBA criteria in these published and candidate sites in Canada. So this is for either global or national criteria. The numbers in the pie chart there represent percentages of the total number of taxa belonging to each taxonomic group. You can see that dicots and birds make up the two largest groups. And then there's also fishes and monocots, which are fairly highly represented within this pie chart. Another interesting value to look at is the percentage of KBAs that are covered by protected areas. So this histogram shows the number of KBAs, which includes candidate sites, and it shows it by the percentage of the site that overlaps with protected and conserved areas. As you can see, about 37% of all KBAs have less than 1% of their area covered by protected areas, whereas only 6% of KBAs are more than 99% protected and conserved. And this just shows that a lot of the KBA work is happening in places that are not already protected, although there is some overlap with protected and conserved areas.
Fantastic. So now that we've kind of heard more of a national update, we're going to get into updates for each of the provinces and territories as well. So I'll start us off in British Columbia, where we have 40 accepted KBAs and 183 candidate KBAs remaining. And as Chelsea mentioned, a lot of those sites could be in various stages of review, whether that be technical review with experts or general review, or even being reviewed by our steering committee, or some sites where we've only recently received data and we're kind of starting that proposal development a little bit later in the process. So for our first provincial case study, I want to bring us over to a KBA on the western coast of Vancouver Island. This is the Carmana-Walbrand Forest, which is some of the last remaining old-growth forest in British Columbia. This site is home to huge western hemlock, Sitka spruce, and western red cedars. Now, some of this site is within the Carmana-Walbrand Provincial Park, which offers it protection. However, other areas are in the upper and central Walbrand have been subject to intensive logging and clear cutting that goes down to the valley bottoms. Now, this site and many other old growth forests in BC are incredibly important for threatened species like marble murrelets that build their nests on the mossy branches of these old growth trees. It's also super important for rare plants like Smith's fairy bells that also meet KBA criteria here, and so many other coastal old growth biodiversity. Now, the fight to protect these forests from logging is being led by naturalist groups like the Friends of Carmana, who have been working tirelessly to document species here and advocate for their protection, and who were really involved in the development of this KBA proposal as well.
The work in Alberta is very much underway as well. Most KBAs, as you can see, are still in development or review. But we do have some really exciting sites that have been published and identified, places like Frank Lake South, which is a really well-known IBA and really exciting place to bird, and a place where the KBA information has been used to influence work and development around the site. I'm gonna, as a case study, dive into a site in the far north of Alberta, Wood Buffalo. This is a pretty huge site. I think it's about 55,000 square kilometers, so definitely on the larger end of KBA's, and actually overlaps or kind of overlaps with Northwest Territories as well. So interprovincial site here. This is a really exciting place. It's a place that overlaps with a couple of IBAs that have been identified in the past, the Whooping Crane Summer Range and the Peace Athabasca Delta. And it's a site that overlaps with Wood Buffalo National Park as well. This is a site that holds, in addition to the incredible kind of bird values here and globally threatened whooping crane, it also happens to be the second largest extant population of wild bison in the world. So aside from Yellowstone, this is the largest wild population of bison in the world, which is something incredibly cool that I didn't realize until we started identifying this site. This is a site where we've had a lot of engagement with locals as well, local experts at the park, within the province, and within a lot of the First Nations nearby as well. So we've done a lot of work with Mikisew Cree First Nation, Askabatha Chipewyan, Little Red River Cree, and several other First Nations and Métis organizations around this site to develop the boundaries and the text for this KBA. So a really, really cool site.
Now I'll move us back over into the prairies. So Saskatchewan has 19 accepted KBAs. Actually, quite a lot of these were only recently accepted. I think about 10 sites were identified for the endangered piping plover in the prairies. So it was great to get a lot of these small kind of prairie pothole lakes recognized. And there are still 31 Canada KBAs that we're working on investigating to see if they will become accepted KBAs in the future. So our case study for Saskatchewan is a relatively small lake in northern Saskatchewan, which is Kazan Lake. So Kazan Lake is home to large populations of colonial water birds like American white pelican and double-crested cormorants that nest on the kind of small islands within the lake. So following our outreach efforts for this site, we actually learned that Kazan Lake was within a really large proposed Indigenous protected and conserved area in northern Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan IPCA. So this proposed IPCA is a huge area of boreal forests, wetlands, and lakes where over 300 species have been reported in, I believe, the last 100 years. So within this huge area, Kazan Lake was actually noted as an area of particular interest in many of the community interviews that they conducted during the development work for the IPCA. So this kind of sparked a really great collaborative relationship between us and the Métis local who are now working to co-propose the Kazan Lake KBA with Birds Canada. So this has involved, adding biodiversity information and cultural information to the site and kind of just developing a collaborative relationship with them, which has been great. Now I'll take us over to Manitoba, where we have 14 accepted KBAs and 42 candidate KBAs. And actually a good handful of these candidates that are located in kind of the southwestern corner of the province will hopefully soon be accepted KBAs following some collaborative workshops with Sioux Valley Dakota Nation. We'll be able to add some additional cultural and biodiversity information to those sites and really strengthen those site proposals. Also in these candidates are some really exciting upcoming KBAs in the Churchill and James and Hudson Bay area. So the Manitoba case study I find really interesting. So that is the Saskatchewan River Delta Key Biodiversity Area. So this site actually began as two important bird areas. We had the Saskatchewan River Delta in Manitoba and the Cumberland Marshes in Saskatchewan. And kind of as they were already abutting each other and sort of divided by this kind of artificial provincial boundary. However, after kind of investigating data for this site, new United States Fish and Wildlife Service waterfowl surveys kind of came to light, where we realized that the survey area encompassed the two IBAs almost perfectly, in addition to some extra area that is part of the Saskatchewan River Delta hydrologically. So we were able to work really closely with folks from Cumberland House Cree Nation, University of Saskatchewan, Ducks Unlimited, Opaskwayak Cree Nation, Nature Manitoba, Nature Saskatchewan, just to name some of the organizations that were involved in this kind of development of this mega site to really refine the boundaries and include new species and make sure we are kind of representing this as ecologically relevantly as possible. So that is kind of how we ended up with this new KBA boundary that represents the hydrological boundaries of the Saskatchewan River Delta. And we were able to add really cool things other than waterfowl. So we have this small blue area, which is for Laurie's water lily. And this is Egg Lake for the lily. And this is actually one of only 3 sites known globally for this species. And we were also able to add lake sturgeon from the Saskatchewan and Nelson Rivers population to the site as well, which was really great to see more biodiversity added to this mega bird site. And my last provincial update will be for Ontario. So we have quite a few accepted sites in Ontario with 37 accepted KBAs on the website, and an additional 84 that are kind of still under investigation, including a lot of these sites up in James Bay, which are kind of pending Indigenous outreach, but we have quite a lot in Southern Ontario as well to continue working on and developing. So I can't go without mentioning Long Point and Peninsula Marshes, which, as many of you know, is near and dear to us here at Birds Canada, and for very good reason. So Birds Canada was founded as Long Point Bird Observatory in 1960, which is within this site, and it remains today to be a world-class training facility for biologists from around the world to come and experience the incredible biodiversity we have here at Long Point. So you can see some folks doing some banding at the Bird Observatory down here, and someone holding a little spiny soft shell up in the right-hand corner. So as you can see by this screenshot that I took from iNaturalist of Long Point, this site is incredibly biodiverse and also incredibly well visited. This is one of our KBAs that has the most species which meet KBA criteria, with 27 total species. So we have 3 amphibians and reptiles, 13 different bird species, 4 fishes, 4 vascular plants, and 3 sensitive species. And among that, 16 of those are species at risk. The site is even more important because it is one of the first KBAs recognized for ecosystems in Canada. So this KBA has been recognized for the presence of the rare Great Lakes dune ecosystem type.
Awesome. So now we're going to keep moving a bit further east, and I'm going to give a bit of update for Quebec. So as I mentioned briefly before, there's still lots of ongoing work in Quebec, and this is because the work in Quebec started a bit later than in the other provinces. The work in Quebec is also structured a bit differently, in that the work for non-bird species in Quebec is led by a team at University of Sherbrooke at the Integrative Ecology Lab. So currently, we have 6 accepted sites in Quebec, and there's still many more that are in progress. So the case study that I wanted to highlight for Quebec is in the Gaspé Peninsula, and this is Bay de Gaspé and Forillon. This site was created by merging 2 former IBAs, which you can see on the map there in pink. These IBAs were merged and also extended to include Forillon National Park, where multiple plant species meet KBA criteria. As you can see from the blue shapes within the site, those are internal boundaries for 2 plant species. One of those is Quebec rock cress, and the other is for dense draba. We've also included the Forillon Peninsula cliffs and also a marine area surrounding them, and that's for the large black-legged kittiwake breeding colony, which meets KBA criteria. And Bay de Gaspé is also included within this site in order to highlight the nationally significant numbers of the eastern populations of harlequin duck, which use this as a molting site, and also Barron's Barrow's goldeneye, which winter within this site as well. And the development and review of this site would not have been possible without lots of help from the Société de Conservation Zico de la Baie de Gaspé, also from the Bird Observatory of Rimouski, and folks from Government de Quebec. Now to move further east and give a bit of a New Brunswick update, we currently have 14 sites accepted in this province. And as you can see, there are still 22 more candidates that are in the works, and many of these are still in the later stages of review. So we'll be continuing to move along. One site that I wanted to highlight in New Brunswick is Quoddy Region. This site was originally just nominated and accepted as a KBA for bird species. It was accepted for large concentrations of Bonaparte's gull, which can be found stopping at this site, where they've been known to remain in large aggregations from July into December, sometimes reaching flocks of up to 10,000 before departing to head further south. There's also significant numbers of great blackback gull that use the KBA for overwintering, when large congregations can be found feeding on krill in the tidal upwellings of this site. We are now going back and reassessing this site in order to add a plant species, Donlin sedge, which has been highlighted at this site using the small blue shape that you can see in that southern part of the site there. Donlin sedge has a very limited global range that, as presently understood, extends into Canada only at this one locality in the extreme southwestern part of New Brunswick. Many folks have been involved in reviewing this proposal so far, and this includes folks from Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Centre, Nature New Brunswick, Passamaquoddy Nation, and the University of Maine, in addition to many others as well. Now to move on to Nova Scotia. I'll hand it over to Peter.
Thanks, Chelsea. Nova Scotia, like a lot of the Atlantic Canada regions, is quite far along as well in terms of the KBAs that have been identified. So about half of them are published and accepted. Some of the gaps or places where KBAs are still to come are, of course, Cape Breton, as you can see, kind of the northern end, and then a few kind of scattered across the rest of Nova Scotia. Kejimkujik being another exciting KBA that'll be coming soon as well for a few species. The one that I want to focus on is kind of at the southwestern end of, southeastern end of Nova Scotia, and that's Middle Ohio to Port Jolly. So this is a really interesting site on the coast. The coast supports really large numbers of piping plover, breeding piping plovers, but the inland area as well is one of the highest concentrations and diversity of species at risk lichens in all of Atlantic Canada. So it's a really well known among the few who might be lichenologists or know lichens, really well known area in Atlantic Canada. There's a photo of some of the lichen species here, boreal felt lichen and vole's ears lichen, some really unique looking species that are threatened in the country, and this is an important site for. This place also overlaps with a proposed Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area, the PEMSIC Conservation Mosaic. And so we've been working with Melissa Labrador, who is a proposer of that IPCA. We've been working with her on this proposal around some of the information and the boundaries as well for this site. So another kind of really great case of collaboration in this around this area.
So now to move on to Prince Edward Island. As you can see, there's not as many sites identified as the other provinces, with only 4 candidate KBAs. However, 2 of these KBAs are very close to being accepted and are in the very, very last stage of review. So it'll be very exciting to get those through. One of the sites of those that's very far along is the Western PEI Sandhills. This site was formerly composed of 2 IBAs, Casempuk Bay and Alberton Harbor and Malpeque Bay. Species that qualify at this site are Gulf of St. Lawrence pinweed, which is present within the blue internal boundary there. We also have piping plover, which nests on the sites within, or on the beaches within this site. And then there's also nationally significant numbers of double-crested cormorant, which breed on the islands within Malpeque Bay.
Newfoundland and Labrador, another place where we have quite a few accepted KBAs relative to the candidate ones. So a lot of accepted sites here for birds and historic IBAs, places that used to be IBAs, highlighting important breeding colonies or migration stopovers. I wanted to zero in on a couple of new sites that I think are really neat and highlight kind of the additional diversity that the KBA program is bringing to this batch of sites. And that's about a dozen sites on kind of northern Newfoundland that have been highlighting the unique limestone barrens ecosystems and the rare and threatened species that are falling in within that are within them as well. So limestone barrens are a globally rare ecosystem, quite a unique one that's only found in a couple places, and has a host of kind of species at risk that are found only there and in a few other places in the world. And so species like Barron's willow, this beautiful pink, looks like a flower, but is a kind of a full willow tree as well in the bottom, and other plants like Fernald's bria and Long's bria are some of the species that are being highlighted by these sites. For these ones, we worked with the provincial limestone barren species at risk recovery team, and they played a really big role in terms of helping with review data and provide data on these sites and helping map them out as well. Moving further north to the territories, Yukon was actually the starting point for WCS Canada and the KBA and our KBA work here. So actually, all of the non-bird species KBAs that we've scoped out in Yukon have been published and are accepted. Birds Canada is still very much hard at work in crosswalking those IBAs, and they'll be added hopefully not too long. But some really exciting sites here. I'll zero into one in northern Yukon, which is Kikiktaruk or Herschel Island. So this is a pretty small site, very much like just off the very, very north coast of Yukon in the Inuvialuit settlement region. It used to be an IBA for red-necked phalarope, snow geese, and surf scoter. Unfortunately, I don't believe there's any recent data for this confirming this site, but it does meet criteria for a butterfly. So this is a great example of IBAs hosting exciting data for or being exciting spots for a lot more species than just birds, and some of these IBAs being able to be kept in as KBAs because of those other species. So this is a site that holds this 4 alpine spotted butterfly or 4 dotted alpine butterfly, specific subspecies of it. Also important for a whole lot of other Arctic mammals, from barren ground caribou to muskox to polar bear. It's a site that's very threatened by climate change and thawing permafrost. So the KBA designation here, although the site's already a national park, KBA designation can help bring a little more attention to some of the threats there. And this site, we were able to work with the local hunter and trapper committee to review the KBA and incorporate some new information on the site as well.
So now for Northwest Territories. As you can see, we have 9 sites in the Northwest Territories that have been accepted so far, although I will note that one of these is the Whooping Crane nesting site that, as Peter mentioned, is now being combined into a larger wood buffalo site, which is very exciting. We still have many ongoing candidate sites. We have 12 of those. And one of the sites I wanted to highlight that's still in the works is the Banks Island Migratory Bird Sanctuary. This site is being nominated for multiple bird species that breed at this site in nationally and or globally significant numbers. Some of these species are king eider, snow goose, tundra swan, yellow-billed loon, and snowy owl. There's also an amazing diversity of mammals at this site, including polar bear, prairie caribou, Arctic fox, and muskox. The boundary for this site has been kept the same as the original IBA delineation, which follows the extent of the existing migratory bird sanctuary here. The site has been reviewed by people from Canadian Wildlife Service, and we're currently working on reaching out to folks from the Wildlife Management Advisory Committee for Northwest Territories and the Inuvialuit Game Council. So still some ongoing work there. And to move on to Nunavut, we have 3 sites that have been accepted and another 30 that are still in progress as candidates. Much of our work in Nunavut currently is focused on attending meetings with relevant Indigenous groups for many of the candidate sites that we are working on. One of the big sites that I wanted to highlight is Lancaster Sound, which combines 11 former IBAs. Most of these IBAs were designated for breeding seabird colonies, and we made the final decision to combine these into a larger site, which follows the delineation of the Tellerutiapamanga National Marine Conservation Area, which allows us to highlight areas throughout Lancaster Sound that these seabird colonies would rely on for foraging during the early breeding season, in addition to their actual breeding colonies. So as you can see with the blue internal boundaries there, those highlight the breeding colonies for seabirds. And then we've also highlighted the southwest plain of Violet Island, which is where there's globally significant numbers of snowy owl breeding. Lancaster Sound also supports large numbers of other marine species like narwhal, beluga, walrus, and harp seals as well. Our next steps for this site involve working more on Indigenous outreach by attending various meetings with the Area Co-Management Committee various Area Co-Management committees that oversee the wildlife areas and migratory bird sanctuaries that are located within this site.
Fantastic. Thanks, Peter and Kelsey. So now that we've kind of heard what we've been up to the last couple years in each province and territory, what's coming next. So finishing up this IBA to KBA transition over the next several months. In addition to that, establishing new KBAs for birds. That work has started. And WCS Canada will continue working on their species KBA identification, as well as the ecosystem and ecological integrity KBA ID work that Peter mentioned as well. So with this kind of identification phase wrapping up, we're shifting our focus to stewarding KBAs with the development of a KBA action plan, as well as an upcoming KBA coalition meeting. So that meeting will bring together partners of the KBA program to think kind of strategically about how these sites and this information can be used for conservation outcomes. So with the shift to focusing on stewardship, we of course have to talk about caretaking, and that's why all of you are here today. So I want to kind of bring us back to the IBA Caretaker program. So the IBA Caretaker program, we sort of viewed as more of a linear model with the national coordinator having a connection to the provincial and regional coordinators, and then those folks kind of liaising with local coordinators as well. So we had these through lines of communication between the national coordinator and the provinces to the caretakers, but we didn't have direct links between the national team and folks on the ground caretaking these sites. So since the 1990s when the IBA program was initiated in Canada, the program has grown immensely. And with this IBA KBA transition and new sites being identified for other taxas only continued to grow since then. So now more than ever, we need a truly national approach to stewarding KBAs and need to improve the connection that Birds Canada or the national national coordinator has with caretakers and provincial and regional coordinators. So that is where the idea of kind of a circular model or a hub comes into play. So this kind of circular model would focus on better connections and communication between all members of the KBA Canada caretaking program. The hub could look like an online platform or something else that's designed for all things kind of KBA caretaking and provide a central place for all the parties to connect and share and learn from each other. Ultimately, the goal of kind of a more circular program would just be improving the cohesion of the caretaking program for KBAs. So some things that we would like to improve or envision improving. With this new model, as I mentioned, the main focus is connection and communication at all levels of the KBA network. So our hope would be to reduce confusion around things like who do I talk to about this and having those roles and responsibilities really clearly outlined. Having better communications would also hopefully increase connection between regional coordinators, which would allow for kind of more program consistency across the country and how those are being delivered as well. So in doing that, we also want this to be a collaborative process and allow opportunities for feedback from coordinators and caretakers, which is a reason we really wanted to do this with you all today. We also would like to continue improving outreach and engagement with Indigenous communities. We want to recognize that this is something that the IBA program didn't really do well at the start in the 1990s, and we really wanted to change this. So we've been committed to improving this throughout the KBA identification process, and we hope that this will continue when looking at caretaking and stewarding these sites as well. This could be in the form of groups taking on caretaking roles or co-caretaking, or just simply keeping folks more informed of ongoing conservation efforts in KBAs within their traditional territory. We also want to provide caretakers and coordinators with more resources to help you run the best program possible. And this would hopefully include resources in French for our folks in Quebec and New Brunswick and other provinces. Some things that won't change from the IBA caretaking program. Kind of at the center of all of this work will still be a commitment to conservation and stewardship of these sites, which has always been the ultimate goal of the IBA program, and it did a really fantastic job at that. but we only want to keep improving and get better at what we've been doing. So we want to provide resources that aim for consistency in some areas, but also allow coordinators to still have the independence to run their programs how you see fit. Lastly, caretakers will remain as the on-the-ground eyes and ears for all of these sites. Birds Canada and provincial and regional coordinators don't have the ability to be in all of these sites at once, as much as we would love to be there. So we've always relied really heavily on caretaker input, and we hope that kind of a more connected model would make your lives easier and give you the tools that you need to continue doing the amazing work that you've already been doing. Now I'll just walk through some kind of resource ideas that we have to hopefully improve this program. So starting off with coordinator resources, the ones I've highlighted in green are kind of higher priority resources that we see would be really beneficial to improving the program. So things like communications templates and guidelines that kind of help crosswalk from the IBA branding to KBA branding, funding resources and ideas to keep programs running efficiently and successfully and keep you doing the fantastic stewardship and monitoring work that you already do. Guidance for Indigenous outreach to allow folks that maybe haven't had experience in that kind of approach it more easily. And other things like activity trackers and site need trackers just to keep things organized. Some priority resources we view for caretakers would be updating the old IBA caretaker manual and adding more information about KBAs and a lot of other details. Having a feedback form to allow you to easily share your thoughts with us and provide suggestions and ask questions. Other things could include training and webinars for onboarding new caretakers or, refreshing existing caretakers on certain things. Ways to track threats and volunteer hours or conservation actions within your KBAs as well. And maybe something like an exit interview, which would again provide an opportunity for you to give us feedback and help us continue improving the program. And then some resources that we kind of view as beneficial to all parties would be monitoring guidance and protocols. So I know one thing we've been hearing a lot from caretakers, very understandably, a lot of us are birders here, and that's kind of how we came to the program. And some of your sites have had new taxa added to them. And so we receive a lot of questions of, do I have to start monitoring lichen or these moths or all these other taxa if I'm not comfortable with that? And, the answer is no. If you're a birder at heart and you only want a bird, that's absolutely fine and encouraged. But we want to help provide tools that could, if you're interested in learning how to monitor new taxa, give you those tools or help maybe partner you with someone that has those skills or can provide that training and assistance. Having a roles and responsibilities document, again, would just help increase kind of cohesion and communication and that kind of who does what and who should I talk to about what piece of the puzzle. And just a couple other things like a volunteer sign-up page or yearly confirmation of participation would help things run smoothly. And then ideally having a way to recognize you for all of the fantastic work that you've been doing across the country as well. And now I'm going to pass it over to Liam Reagan, who is the BC Provincial KBA Coordinator from BC Nature, to just share some thoughts about caretaking.
Awesome. Hey, folks, very privileged to talk to you all today. I just want to start with a quick acknowledgement that one of the people in the crowd today was actually pivotal in creating caretaking to begin with, Anne Murray. So we're in good company here as we talk about the future of caretaking, its history, and where we need it to go. So in thinking about which site to highlight and talk about the impacts of caretakers at the local scale, there's, as you just saw, innumerable examples to choose from, both of sites and the people that care for them. But in trying to find a site that I thought demonstrated both the stewardship, education, and monitoring aspects that are so critical to caretaking, one that really came out was the Heskett Lake area IBA, which is just on the cusp of becoming a very exciting KBA. Our caretaker there, Diane Ignis, has been absolutely pivotal in making sure that we can keep any idea of what's going on there. As you saw, many sites throughout the country are incredibly remote, and sometimes our caretaker serves the role of hey, it's here. There hasn't been an oil spill. I'm the only person who goes here on a yearly basis, or one of very, very few. And so that you don't have to be, Birds Canada, WCS, BC Nature coming in from Victoria, Ottawa, wherever, parachuting in, I can provide that local context. And so on the stewardship side, she and her family lead coastal cleanup work to remove plastics from the site, to help prevent, buildup in the environment. On the education side, she's pivotal in bringing Heskett youth, the First Nation for Heskett Peninsula, to the site to learn about the herring spawn, to learn about marbled murrelets, to learn about all the things that make the site so critical. And on the monitoring side, which is I think really where the bread and butter comes in for caretaking, she, as all of you know of, is responsible for her annual report, which highlights the ongoing threats, ongoing opportunities, and ongoing efforts in the KBA site. And part of that, which I think is kind of what demonstrates to me both the critical value of caretakers and why they're so necessary. Through her reporting, she flagged to us in 2021 that there had been some massive mudslides that took out some of the marbled murrelet nesting habitat, and said, hey, we know the site is globally significant for marbled murrelet. Can BC Nature and their partners step up to do some renewed monitoring and see how this might have affected the population? Thanks to partners such as the UVic Bird Watching Club, BC Field Ornithologists, and Birds Canada, we were able to go do an assessment and see that it looked like, although they might have affected the population, more research required, there was still a significant number there. But as often happens, talking to caretakers, talking to locals, being connected in with the local First Nation, we were told marbled murrelets is important, but the real gem of this area is the herring spawn. Would you be willing to come back in future years to do surveys on photo here, surf scoters? And so over the last 2 years, again, with those same students from the UVic Bird Watching Club, again, with the same partners of Birds Canada and WCS, we've gone and demonstrated that this site, which was originally known as an IBA for marbled murrelet, supports so much more throughout so many different times of the year. That work now has us designating it for Brandt's cormorant, Iceland gull, and surf scoter. And then beyond just the bird world, we also, by bringing in partners from the BC Parks INET team, identified it as one of the largest populations of endangered seaside centipede lichen. And then with WCS's support, it looks like we might also be able to recognize the Pacific herring that are coming into the bay and supporting these birds. After all, none of that would have been possible without the caretaker. We literally would not have had a place to stay, much less an idea of what to look for. So I thought that gave a pretty good example of just how critical the work of everyone here today is, and how important it is that we continue to support caretakers, listen to caretakers, and ensure that you play a leading role in conservation going forward. Thank you. Back to you, Molly.
Actually, I'm gonna take over. Thank you, Liam, and everyone for your presentations, and thanks everyone for the questions in the Q&A box. Really good questions. So we'll close with just a few recent and upcoming KBA work. I think some of this we've already talked about, but so the 2024 annual report was sent out last week. So if you haven't seen it, check it out on our website or let us know and we can send a copy of it over. Our first goal for caretaker resource development, like Molly was talking about, is to redo some existing pieces of IBA guidance so that it's more relevant for KBAs. And we're going to start with the caretaker manual. It would be really good to get feedback on a draft of this when we're done. So if that's something you're interested in as a caretaker, please let us know. As far as species KBAs, I think Peter mentioned this. We all hope to have all the sites kind of in the queue, at least to be identified and completed by June 2025. And then he also talked about the work on ecosystem and ecological integrity. It's ongoing and really exciting. There's already a few sites on the website for it, so check those out for geographically restricted ecosystems. And our emails are listed here if you have any questions that aren't answered today about the program, about sites, or if you're interested in becoming a caretaker, please get in contact with us. Next slide, last slide. So thanks again for coming to this webinar. It's so great to see, the enthusiasm for the KBA program and from all the existing caretakers, maybe future caretakers. So now, we'll just open it up to some more questions that you might have. I see that there's a few Hands up already. Someone from the very beginning may be very excited to ask a question. So Chelsea will unmute you once I can find where that is. Or I can unmute you. Okay, Sonia, I have unmuted you. Would you like to ask a question? No? No, okay. If you have a question and you can't unmute, let me know and we can try to figure it out. Okay, so I'll move on to Courtney. I hope this is working. Is this working? Courtney, you can unmute yourself and talk and chat now if you'd like. Maybe it's not working. No, okay. Oh, not you, Courtney. Sorry, another Courtney. Courtney Lehue.
If I'm not mistaken, Sonia and Courtney had their hands up from the very beginning. So maybe either Jillian or Kara, who just put their hands up, we could test the mic with them.
I don't think Courtney was from the beginning, but we can. I'm just clicking allow to talk and it says ask to unmute. Oh, Courtney unmuted herself. Okay. Okay. I guess move on to Jillian.
Hear me?
Yes.
Hear me?
It worked.
There we go. I have a gazillion questions,
Oh, good.
so I don't really know where to start. I'm a current caretaker, and it was all very interesting, but I still really don't understand how KBAs are different from IBAs, apart from the fact that you're going to throw a few more plants and insects and stuff in, and how that affects what I do when I trot down to Whitewater.
Okay.
Anybody want to give me a clue?
Yeah, well, I think you have it. The difference is that it's, more holistic and highlighting other species, not just birds. I think we've known for a long time that all these IBAs are really important for birds, but also for other species. So highlighting that is super important. That is the main difference. There's a few, nuanced criteria differences, but yeah, including other species in the mix is the big difference.
Okay, so I'm interested in butterflies and dragonflies and plants and stuff, but I have very little expertise. Is there an expectation that I get the expertise, or I'm a bit don't know where I am with that?
Yeah. We knew this would be a question. We know that, there's a lot of existing IBAs that have caretakers at them already who are very bird focused, and that's okay. We aren't expecting anyone to learn how to identify a lichen, but I think Molly did mention this, we will be eventually providing guidance on how to do that if you want to, or if there is someone else in the area that's interested in it. We want people to know about the other species that are really important for the KBA, and not just birds. But if you can't do that, I mean, we can't force anyone to learn about lichens and and start IDing them. So if you want to keep focusing on the birds, that's fine, but there will be guidance and information about the other species as well.
So do you have a plan to recruit people that are experts in these other fields?
Yeah, it's in the beginning stages of a plan on how to take care of the other KBAs that have non-bird species at them.
I mean, I happen to know, can't remember the name of it now. Seaside heliotrope, yes, maybe. There are plants there that were actually discovered there by us tramping around. But okay, so you've not quite sort of worked that one out yet. Another thing you said that there are quite a few IBAs that have not been accepted. I'm wondering, are there any plans for, they were IBAs for a reason, don't meet KBA standards, I gather. So what's happening with them?
Well, there's a few reasons why they could not be meeting KBA standards, and I think many of them wouldn't even meet IBA standards anymore if we were to go back and reassess those. So they won't be included in the KBA layer, and we won't be like putting resources towards them anymore, because the KBA layer will be the most up-to-date information about sites. And yeah, we're working hard to try and gather all the data we can. So there's some sites that aren't qualifying because we can't find data or an expert. But there's some sites that the birds are just gone. So they just won't be identified as a site anymore.
Right. Yeah. Habitat has gone in quite a few places.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Right. So you don't have any plans. Is there a list of the ones that have been
Yeah, someone asked that. It's a really good question. I mean, we have the old IBA map. I don't think that we have a list that we just can send out to anyone, but if you're interested in any areas, like we could definitely share that information with you, like why it's been assessed as not a KBA.
Yeah, that would be interesting because I have a suspicion in Manitoba because I caretaker for one, but visit a lot of them and always do eBird lists when I go there. So sure. Yeah, I'm interested to know. And some I'm not even sure that you've got all the data from them because I've just recently found another source of data. So
by all means.
So there's no real plan because that seems like an awful lot of data for an awful lot of places that's kind of disappearing.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working the last 4 years trying to gather data for places that we don't have data for. Yes, Peter.
I just wanted to highlight to help answer Jillian's question from earlier as well. If you look, Jillian, at the end of the KBA annual report from this year, there are a couple of appendices, and one of those appendices does have a list of sites that we like to call maybe-As. So they're not KBAs yet, but they might be in the future. A lot of these are for non-bird species, but there are a couple of bird ones that the Birds Canada team put in as well. I don't know if it's the full complement of sites that you're looking for, but that could be one resource if you're interested in like visiting some other places and looking for spots where there's just a little more data needed. That's one place to look, and we can build those out in future over the year and make sure the other bird sites are included there too.
That's true.
But there's not actually a list of the ones that have been axed or are disappearing, non-qualifying. Sorry, use that term.
No.
Okay, I would appreciate that, at least for Manitoba, just so we kind of know what's happening, because we don't even know whether they're still in review or they've gone.
Yeah, contact Molly if you have any specific questions. She will be glad to share that information with you.
Yeah, and I can make a note to get in touch with you, Jillian, and I can send you some information.
Cool. I've just got one quick question, and that comes from my interaction with the ISS people, in that data consistency is very important, and we're going to lose some data consistency in changing boundaries, I believe. Have you got ways of dealing with that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So
who's the ISS, sorry.
International Shorebird Survey.
Oh, okay.
And they
I see what you're saying.
they're very insistent on keeping the same places, even though the birds are not there because the water's moved. But that's another discussion entirely. I'm talking, say, for instance, the Oak Lake IBA, which I'm pretty sure will get accepted, which has had a significant change in boundary. So now the data won't be equivalent.
Well, wouldn't the shorebirds just be in the same spots though, and wasn't that covered before in the IBA?
No, I'm just thinking in a general term. You're going to get new birds. You're going to get more birds because you've got a bigger area. It's not totally
Does anyone have thoughts on this? I'm not.
I can hop
sure.
in. I guess maybe, yeah, to provide a couple thoughts. In redelineating a lot of these sites, you know, if it was a site that is super important for shorebirds, like if the boundaries have changed in all of the review we've had with experts in those discussions, like the core habitat for those species should still be retained within those boundaries. I would also say, you know, if you're doing a separate survey for ISS that's not to do with, you know, KBAs or IBAs, and you want to continue doing it within, you know, the IBA boundary for consistency that you can find on the IBA website, like feel free to continue doing that. But I think in most cases, the boundaries should still be representative of the areas for those bird species that are being, you know, that are still really important in that area, from the IBA to KBA process. Did that help answer
sort
any
of.
of your questions? Okay. And we can
Yeah.
chat more too. We could have a meeting if
Yeah.
you'd like and really get into it.
Cool. Okay, I've taken up enough time, I think. Let somebody else have a go if they can get their mic going.
Thank you, Jillian.
Maybe just to provide one slight piece of context to Jillian's original question there around sort of the role of caretaking within a KBA context. I want to echo what Anne Murray had said in the comments about the role of iNaturalist for caretakers. Like Amanda said, we're not expecting people who have, you know, dedicated their passion, their career to birds to suddenly go out and have to study lichens, study butterflies, figure out the intricacies of how to dissect spiders to figure out what subspecies they might be. If you want to do that, we of course fantastic. But iNaturalist, for those not aware, is a really good resource for that, especially things like butterflies and plants. It can be really good for helping document species that you don't even know what they are. You know, in BC in the last few years, for example, we found untold numbers of endangered populations just by folks who, you know, don't have a specific specialization going, taking a photo of a plant and us going, oh my goodness, that's the endangered who knows what. This last summer, we found a population of special concern Johnson's hair streak, one of only like 8 or so populations in the country, because we were sitting around a fire and one flew by and we went, huh, wonder what that is. And lo and behold, we now have a possible KBA candidate from that. So if anyone is feeling like this is kind of more than they can handle, we promise, you know, there's tools out there and yeah.
Right. No one else has their hands up, but there's a few more questions in the chat that we haven't answered yet. What is the timeline for the KBA Caretaker program to roll out? We're just focusing on kind of gathering funding and more support for it right now, so there's no set timeline, but we will keep you up to date, Stephanie, as we move along. Is there hierarchy in funding between IBAs and KBAs? I would say if you have a KBA, if you're trying to get funding for it, it would be the smart thing to use the KBA, because there's just more up-to-date information, possibly more species involved in the site, and yeah, it's just a lot more up to date. The IBA website is not up to date, and neither are the sites on there. So I'm not sure if I'm answering that. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
I guess just to kind of build on that, maybe interpreting it a bit differently, I think like national funding would kind of be going more towards development of and stewardship and monitoring of KBAs versus IBAs that did not meet KBA criteria.
Okay. Naomi, did we kind of answer the first part of that question? What is the role expected? Kind of chatted about that already. I'm not sure if you want to ask your question out loud or not. Will there be funding opportunities and consultation opportunities associated with the switch? I'm not sure about funding opportunities for the switch from IBAs to KBAs. we're kind of doing work in the background, and I think maybe you've talked to Chelsea already. I'm not sure, but hopefully there will be greater leverage with KBA, with the KBA name or designation behind the site to apply for funding later. I'm not sure what funding you would be talking about, but I think I answered that all. I'm not sure. If I didn't answer it, please speak up or type in some more.
I just noticed there's also another question that was just put in the chat that maybe we can answer. I think Walter said, does the USA have a parallel IBA KBA program underway? I'm assuming Bird Studies Canada or Birds Canada coordinates with our southern neighbors. Yeah, answer that one as well.
Oh, sure. I think I answered that in the Q&A, but I'm not 100% sure how far they are, the Audubon Society, in updating their IBAs as KBAs. I think they have started the process. They're not as far along. As far as individual sites go, we've collaborated with a few that are cross-border sites. So Niagara is one of them, and the Detroit River is another one, where they actually coordinate bird surveys on both sides of the river. So we have coordinated when it comes to site-specific things, but for the whole program, not really. But maybe Peter has something more to say on other species besides birds.
Yeah, I can add just in general as well. There's no coordinated KBA program in the United States in the same way that there is in Canada. Here we have kind of the formal secretariat of Birds Canada and WCS Canada and NatureServe Canada. The US does not have that. It doesn't seem like they're likely to get it anytime soon at the last that I heard. The obvious organization in the US that could kind of cover all taxa other than birds is NatureServe. Just like in Canada, NatureServe kind of connects with all of the states in the US and holds a lot of data on threatened and rare species. They're working on other types of kind of biodiversity mapping tools and approaches, and it doesn't seem like they're super interested for some reason in kind of going in on the KBAs as well. So it doesn't seem like they'll have a coordinated approach to KBAs like Canada does, but like Amanda said, they are. It sounds like some organizations are working on crosswalking their IBAs into some KBAs.
Okay, Naomi, I don't think I'm saying that name right. I'm sorry. Thanks for your answer. I guess my question is more related to the data needed to document and identify the KBAs. I'm not sure if you're doing this research or if it's our responsibility. We are trying as hard as we can to do the research in the background of surveys and data that already exists. So as far as kind of further surveys, there are a whole bunch of sites in Canada that probably do need to be surveyed more, but we're not focusing on kind of like funding those yet. It could be later that we focus on those, maybe A's that might qualify if we have more surveys for them. But for now, we're just it's kind of data gathering and trying to identify it based on what's already exists.
I can also just add to that specifically for SEP deals. I've been in contact with Sarah Emily from the Committee ZFA. So we're in the process of getting that site into the next stage of review. So you'll probably get an email soon about that site specifically, but for that site, we do have sufficient data and information to nominate it as a KBA. But yeah, I can follow up with some more information as well.
Okay. Trying to see if there's other questions. I think they're all being answered. Oh, Jillian Richards, your hand is up. Let's see if I can unmute you again. Okay. Yes.
There we go. I put it in the chat too. In one of your answers, you inferred that pre-existing IBAs would remain as IBAs. So that was a bit confusing for me over the ones that had not been accepted as KBAs. Is that right? Or did I misinterpret what somebody said?
Do you mean that sites that aren't KBAs?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, there's going to be like a historical IBA website that's up. But like I said, none of the information will be updated. It won't be up to date on the IBA website. We're going to put all of our kind of resources to updating things and keeping things up to date. Every 10 to 12 years is when KBAs get reassessed. So that's what we'll be kind of focusing on, is reassessing KBAs. I mean, if new information ever becomes available for an IBA that didn't become a KBA, we would definitely look at that. But for IBAs that definitely don't qualify, yeah, I guess they will be.
For example, at present, when I'm entering data on eBird for an IBA, I use IBA protocol. Will that still be available for the IBAs that aren't converted to KBAs?
Well, first of all, the IBA protocol is changing because eBird is updating their protocol, so that won't exist anymore. And they're starting to use the KBA layer. So no, that won't be available.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So one would have to create a hotspot or something, and because a lot of these are birding areas that people will go to anyway. They just don't meet the KBA standard.
I think usually they have hotspots already at them that we use for the IBA protocol.
Not in Manitoba, but that's hopefully going to be fixed soon. So the other thing I think, which was a question that somebody else was asking, is what are the expectations for a caretaker? Because when I was originally sold this idea, well, you're going there anyway, so you can just use IBA protocol and we'll get better collection of data. And I've been, religiously. So, but when I look at your sort of ideas of what caretaking is going to be, they also talk about stewardship and conservation. Now, I appreciate the BC example was a very, very good example where somebody had done both in addition, but it's a little different in agricultural Manitoba, where just wondering what the expectations are regards that, rather than just the monitoring.
Yeah, I don't think that will change at all. I think that was always kind of, if there was a threat facing an IBA, that would be kind of top priority. If monitoring is what is needed at the site, that's what the caretaker kind of focuses on. So I don't think any of the expectations regarding stewardship or monitoring or conservation will change at all. It's so case by case basis, what's important for certain sites that I think that'll just be the case still.
Okay, so there'll be a bit more communication there as to what that is. I mean, we keep there's oil extraction at Whitewater, so
right.
There's not much you can do about it.
Right.
there's more pumps every year, but that's just life.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you for monitoring Whitewater Lake.
Yeah, no worries. It's a special place. So we'll be getting more information about how this how will the relationship between you're changing the relationship between the provincial coordination, the caretakers, and the national. So would that mean that the provincial caretakers, provincial coordinators' role would change? Because I'm used to dealing with them.
Yeah, no, I think we're just strengthening it, honestly. I think we're just adding some resources that'll make it easier to organize everything and to get conservation actions happening and where they're needed. I think it's just going to strengthen that. So Marissa will still be there and be helping with provincial coordination.
Right. And she would be the main contact rather than national.
Yes, but hopefully it'll be easier to kind of like input data or input if there's a threat or, you know, something on a centralized kind of system.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions that haven't been answered? Okay. Well, I think we're almost at time. Thank you for all of your questions, and thanks to all the presenters. Thanks everyone for coming and watching this. We will send out the recording, and it'll be on our website within a week or so. So thanks again. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.